Man, this comic book sucks! And the reviews online said it was good! I wasted my money! Why didn't somebody tell me?
Hey everybody, this is Spinner Rack. We have Petey here. We also have
Calvin Ellis, ready to rock one more time.
So now we've decided to add in an old back issue with our reviews. This is something more of a recommend to say, here's this comic, we looked at it again, and you should check it out. So this series is just going to be like, we're not going to get into our tougher things. We're going to just try to look back at stuff, see, and get you to check it out, see what it's worth. So right now we have X Factor #1. This was the relaunch of the original X-Men. They're finally back in working condition. They're like in a team together, and this was a big deal, a big honking deal, because they also brought back Jean Grey. So if you go to the X-Men at this period, Cyclops was pretty much retired after he was married in X-Men 175. He's married off. It was the shotgun wedding because he met her like 6 or 7 issues before that. He marries her, and not that much time passes. He marries Madeline Pryor. So he'd also been sort of part-time for a while. He appeared in the Brood Saga, but he wasn't in a bunch of stories. So he'd kind of been semi out of it, part-time, and then he became fully retired after 175. And then at around, I think, 200, Xavier's also, he shipped into space. So there was no original X-Men presence in the original book. So for me, this was very interesting to have them come back. So I was reading, I didn't know at the time when the books were coming out, I bought Avengers 263, and the Avengers are fighting something in Jamaica Bay, and I have no hint that Jean is coming back. So then at the end of the story, she says, like, Scott, you see Jean Grey, and it's like, oh my God, all of the emotion popped up. None of the things of thinking about, oh my gosh, continuity, all this other stuff, you can't do it, the deaths. I was just like, oh, I was not expecting it. And the next thing I buy Fantastic Four, and I think Marvel Age has already said that she was sort of coming back after that point. So it was like, okay, now I'm going in to see what happened. Now, in the middle of that story, because this is the precursor right before X Factor #1, something happens and they show you what happened to Jean, and it gets kind of gray as far as what the Phoenix is about. And the whole Phoenix sort of tainting, Phoenix tainted by Jean, and I think that's not really what the original stories were like. So when I read it as a kid, I was just like, I don't know, this is getting into that X-Men territory where it gets kind of murky, and I don't really know what this means in comparison to what happened before. But it's like, okay, Jean is back, right? So when we see this first issue, the Defenders are retiring. They're like, this didn't really work out. So it's like Angel, Beast, and Iceman are sort of going their separate ways. And then Angel gets this call from Reed Richards. And they get the original X-Men, except for Scott, to see Jean, and they're all happy. And it's real Jean. It's not Madeline with the split hair like this. It's really Jean, and there's emotion with it. You feel it. It's like you
had to bring split hair in, right?
Because it's like, it's so weird that they would do, if you look at, I'll put up pictures like that, like, I never really, it was easier to just say he fell in love with another redhead, because Paul Smith didn't try at all to make Madeline look anything like Jean, but they kept saying, oh my gosh, she looks so much like her.
And we would find out later why she looks so much like her.
Madeline makes this thing where she says Cyclops can't visit Jean, and he says, I have to. And he not saying he's leaving his wife, he's saying he has to see this person that was so important to him that passed, that she died in front of him. And she's been so completely understanding of the X-Men and all of the other stuff. She will not let this happen. You say because, he compared it. Yeah, of course, so they look alike. What else is he going to do? She said she, survived a plane crash the same day Jean died. Like, everyone else died. It blew up, and Madeline Pryor walked out. So it's like the same day Jean died. So it's like, this it's gonna mean something to them. So they have a simple story where the Angel has an idea, and it's like let's talk about the premise. So you want to add in the premise because I've gone on a little long about the history. Can you talk about the premise of X Factor?
Basic premise, and I have to not qualify this, but as a reader, I don't like mutants. I think they're just. I've never,
Why are we here? No, just kidding.
the concept of them just never made a lot of sense to me. Where these guys with superpowers are feared and hated, but these guys with superpowers, well, they're okay. So they were never able to sell me on that. But I have always been a fan of the original X-Men, that Fab Five. I've always liked them for some reason. I can't say why. I will buy them in action figures. I will buy them in comics. I enjoy them. Fine. So when they decided to do X Factor, I was firmly on board, and I liked the premise. Well, people made fun of the whole thing, like you said, the Ghostbusters now. But the idea of X Factor was you got the original 5 X-Men together, and they were posing as mutant hunters. So if there was a mutant and they were found, people would call up, wait for this, the X-Men. But they didn't know that they were the X-Men because they thought they were X Factor. X Factor would then come out in their new X uniforms, like as superheroes or what have you, or mutant rebellion, and they would come over and either help the person, or they could come out in their civilian identities, which were also disguises as X Factor, and get the mutant the same way, which I thought was very, very clever. I was like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to reach out, find more mutants, so on and so forth. Well, hey, we don't have to wait for them to be in trouble to do it. If we put up this front, people will report it to us. We'll go take them off the street. Instead of them being with Thrask or being raised to be some mutant killer for some apocalypse or something of that nature, in that sort of instance, like Bishop, people tattoos on their face and everything.
Yep, there we go.
We'll get them to someplace safe. We'll train them, okay, and no one will be the wiser to it. So in terms of premise, I was like, this is great. I was like, okay, I really want to see where this goes. That didn't last for too long. That did not last for too long. I didn't expect it to last for too long either, but it was much shorter than I thought it was going to be at the end of the day. But it was a very good premise, and it got everybody. I mean, the whole thing with the Defenders, I don't know if the Defenders was canceled because of its numbers, or if Defenders was canceled because they said, look, we want to take these 3 guys out and put them in X Factor. I cannot remember because Defenders.
I think it's a little of both because it was it was on its last legs, but it wasn't. I don't know if it was in danger of being canceled, but it was like, they put the originals to try to drum up more interest in the book. And they went for a fairly long time, but then it's like they're looking at it like we can do better numbers having an X book. So sort of like Power Man and Iron Fist. So let's cut our losses and try to get a new book that'll bring in more readers.
Yeah, one book, less paper, less cost. Because I was reading the Defenders at the time, so they had those 3, and of course I was waiting for, maybe Cyclops to come in as a guest star. But then, bringing back Jean Grey at that time for me was a big deal because, and again, this is still around Copper Age. This is another Copper Age story. But then going back, all of the history, at least all the history that I had gone so far back on, was about the time Phoenix dies. Everybody knew this. Phoenix died. Everybody loved that cover. Now forever I am Phoenix. I am fire and power incarnate. And, she died. This was this big deal. Everybody remembered the cover, Scott holding her on the cover, him just, his grief, screaming out his grief, and then bringing her back. And I remember reading the story in Fantastic Four, which thankfully I was reading at the time. And I said, you know what? This actually works for me. Okay, she's back. Mm-hmm. So now we have the whole Fab Five going again. And then, of course, the problem with, Jean being back, but Madeline is the girl. And I'm like, I don't see how much longer that's going to last. Eventually, she's going to have to go. And they eventually did. They found a way to write her out, saying she's not real. She's a simulacrum of something or other of that nature. But in terms of bringing them all back together in that first issue, I think the first year's worth of issues were very entertaining, very well plotted. But this is a good jump-on book for somebody who wants to go back and read something. Especially for the person you saw it. It was out. You were a kid, you saw it, and like, oh, I'm not going to read this. This is $1 and some odd. I'll, take my money and buy this. This is a good one to revisit, in as much as that it set a new, where the New Mutants was an extension of the X-Men. this book was more of a return to what the original X-Men was supposed to be about, in terms of we're going to be going out helping people, but at the same time helping mutants as well. At least to a larger extent, because they, after a certain point, it just got to be them fighting against other mutants. This actually brought a little bit of the superheroics back towards it. So, and that had been absent from the book for a very long time. At least for me, because I was like, the X-Men was such a big book, you didn't have to read it to find out what was going on. They were everywhere. And a lot of the stuff bled over into other comics, and you were able to, keep up with what was going on. You didn't have to read the Mutant Massacre to know what was going on, along those lines. But this right over here was in its own pocket. It was a much more conventional story for the X-Men, and executed pretty well for I would say for about the first year. Then, because later on, it's not even these guys anymore. Once again, the Fab Five are gone, and Peter David's writing.
Low. That's like 75, 71 or so. But if we go back to the other part of the X-Men, if you look at, I guess we would say, one of the more popular stories, God Loves, Man Kills, which was a very powerful story, that showcased Magneto running into dead mutants. And one of the things the original book was, if they'd see a mutant being like, it would turn out to be like the Toad, but they saw this guy winning the triathlon and all these events, and they're like, this guy's kind of beyond what normal people are doing. Everyone goes crazy, and X-Men go out and they save him, and that's the thing that X-Factor was bringing back, whereas the X-Men had turned into, no, this Feared and Hated keeps showing these kids dying all the time, and it's like, well, I understand for story reasons why Cerebro doesn't point out when Magneto is about to blow up the planet, because you want more drama to the story. But if you keep finding dead kids who have matured, had hit puberty and got their mutant powers, and Cerebro's not finding this stuff out, it's like, this is just a big, this is some motif that's just sort of like, the X-Men aren't saving them, they're more mutants dying, and it's like sort of saying Magneto's right and the X-Men are wrong, whereas X-Men has Cerebro. They're there to stop those moments. So it was kind of lost. It was playing off of that, because I guess it was more interesting to the fans of seeing these dead mutants, because up even before the Mutant Massacre, they're just finding them all the time. There's some dead Morlocks before the massacre. Magneto is constantly running into them, and it's like, what's going on here? Like, X-Men, stop playing baseball. Stop sitting around and in your weird, like your sexy outfits.
You might as well play baseball. There are all these dead people all the time. Take a break, right? He's like, hey, look, some dead bodies. Must be Wednesday.
Well, that's what it became, and it's sort of like, and I know probably for the X team, they're looking at it and they're like, this is sort of taking it away, because we've changed the premise to this aspect of, to make the humans look, like sort of point out how bad humans can be, whereas the X-Men book wasn't always that. They had humans that were on the fence, they had humans that were helping them, and they had people just like the X-Men in general. When they saw the X-Men, they were like, they sort of like, somehow the girls saw Angel and could realize he was handsome with the mask on. So, they had some fans and they had some detractors like Larry Trask and stuff like, and later, Bolivar Trask and then later Larry Trask. So they also worked at the premise was a bad premise, and that was sort of the X-Men's look at X-Factor. Like, the premise is saying you guys are mutant hunters, and that's just all bad. And it's like, no, they just met them and had a meeting where they said, here, the original's alive, and the X-Men are going to Australia. Have a cool meeting, not them fighting and saying, we're not, oh yeah, we knew you guys when you're the original X-Men. You're out to help mutants, we understand. It's like, no, the press, that plan, mutant hunters, bad premise. And it's like, it's more the X office sort of tearing it apart, not allowing the fans to sort of say it worked. So I'm not for saying Cyclops is bad, he left his wife, because that's not what was going on. He goes to see Jean, he doesn't rekindle the relationship. He rekindles his relationship with his friends. He says he needs to be back on here helping mutants. It's not childish for him to be a superhero, but at the same time, his wife has now cut off all ties. Like, second issue, he calls, all the phone numbers change. And as the book progresses,
yeah, that was fast.
As the book progresses, he's tried to contact her, which no one remembers. I think he's tried to contact her a number of times. He goes out there. They have thing where he finds the dead Madeline, and we don't know what this is. It's like, oh my God! But then
We know what it was. It was like, hey, Jean's back. You gotta go.
But then they put her into the X-Men book, and she's sort of Claremont's also playing to the fact of saying she's not giving them the right information. So it's like it's also tough because Claremont also was involved. I argue with someone online because he rewrote some of the parts of Byrne's Fantastic Four issue, but he's also saying that, you know what, they put, how could they do this? It's like, well, you were involved. You wrote that story and you rewrote Fantastic Four 286, and you did a retcon in classic X-Men. So you've done 2 stories. You're part of it. I would last point out on my points I would like to make is that the X-Men after, I think it was X Factor 69 or something like that, they went back to their original title. They hadn't been in their own title for at least 5 years. Xavier comes back to the title. We have the originals in their own title again. That's the important thing that you remember, that they would we love these characters, and then when they redid them, a lot of people didn't initially like the new X-Men because it's like, the originals they're the real X-Men, and then the new X-Men got popular. The stories, everything worked out. But if you had the New Mutants, you should have brought in the originals to train them, and it doesn't take away from the regular X book. And you have the originals a part of that story, but they sort of became like they were just lame. And that's what Louise Simonson sort of was dealing with, upping their powers to say, these guys aren't lame. These guys, well, no, we're upping their powers, so they're not lame anymore. But we're saying they were lame. So, and I think
now they got more power.
But subsequent stories later, now they're in use and people like them, but they're sort of changing them now. So, any other thoughts on this book or X Factor?
I thought for the X-Men was a good return to form. I thought one of the biggest problems with the mutants is that there's always, and they still have this problem now. You know what? I'm not reading the book now, so I won't go that far. But at the time, there were too many of them. And I thought this was a good return to form. I think what I liked about the original 5 was that the focus was on those 5. And you may have had a villain here or there that was a mutant, or somebody that they were helping that was a mutant, but there wasn't this incredible, the Xavier School, with the powers that these guys had, I could see them telling 5 or 6 people at a time. But when it got to hey, we got 50, 200 people running around here.
Like Grant Morrison, he tried to even beyond the movies. He was just like, they have a full school here.
Yeah, like it's like, how would you be able to do this? You can't do this not with these guys and their abilities, and they don't have the control over them. It's a logistical nightmare at the end of the day. Not every school, it's not a public school.
Yes,
It's a private school. I thought this was a good, return to form where we got to focus on these 5 characters. Once I saw Jean back, I was like, okay, the handwriting's on the wall for Madeline. She's gone.
Yes.
When the second issue comes in, he can't make any connection with her so far. I was like, yo, bye, Madeline. You're gone. There's no way. You could already hear the fan drum beat. Jean and Scott. There was no way it was gonna go. So those things I thought were fine. The focus on them was fine, and again, I thought the premise was fine as well. But this is also a period where storytelling was very, very important. Even though and we talked about this, where I think they got undercut because they couldn't use any of the major villains.
Yes.
But they did get a good villain in Apocalypse out of that. But that's a villain who came into play much later.
Louise, because they were initially planning the Owl to be the head villain, and Louise, since I don't know, Bob Layton was leaving, they put in Apocalypse, which obviously is a bigger villain, and finally they have a villain of grandeur, which ultimately led to so many Fall of Mutants, ton of stories with Apocalypse.
Yeah, very good stuff. Well, hey, that's my 2 cents. Go back and read it. You'll have a good chance.
Yes.
You'll have a rather good chance. You'll have a good time. Go back and read it. You want to read some good stories? This is a good one to start with.
Yes. All right, thanks everybody. Check it out, and we'll be back with you with more reviews in the upcoming weeks. Later.
Thanks, Spinner Rack. You saved me money.